I want to use a few practical examples to give you an idea of where I think, for instance, we could be effective. I've always been wondering that while the world has been limiting its focus on how to bring pressure on the Islamic regime, for instance, in the context of using economic sanctions against the current government, is this necessarily sufficient? Is it sufficient to simply have a policy of sanctions while you maintain the political status quo in mind? Using the South African example, I will tell you that the reason the sanctions were effective was because at the end, the goal was to put an end to apartheid. You cannot have an effective sanction policy without having an alternative in mind. Sanctions cannot be an end, it may be a means to that end. And then I would argue that the better leverage you have against the regime is the force of the people, much more than external economic pressures. Because while you may harm the regime, you do end up harming society as well in the long run. And that is not necessarily a good thing. Or if people in Iran were convinced that there is an intent to put an end to this regime with the help of the international community, because it is their demand, then obviously they'd be willing to take a greater risk in tightening their belts and will be willing to assume additional economic pressure, knowing that at the end the regime may in fact collapse. There are other ways that we can have the Iranian movement at this stage. For instance, I've always been wondering, in what way can we have more solidarity between the outside world and the people inside? Let me offer this. The quickest way to force this regime to paralysis and collapse is no doubt massive labor strikes in Iran on a large scale. Now, wouldn't you think that it would be a good idea to have some kind of a monetary fund with the help of world labor unions, for instance, sanctions by a number of political parties, government, beyond government, citizens of the world, to fund such an entity as a backup and guarantee of compensation for lost wages of striking workers in Iran. And a lot of that help could be provided to Iranians by Iranian NGOs who legally can contribute and come to the assistance of the citizenry, as a means to simply give people more hope that there instrumentally is some help, as opposed to just a few resolutions in, let's say, the German parliament or the EU parliament or the American parliament. And then we leave it at that. I'm trying to find constructive ways of strengthening civil society in Iran at every stage of the game. And in the future, the preservation of it once we are successful. How can we strengthen elements of civil society in Iran yet again? Because if you don't have strong labor unions, if you don't have syndicates, if you don't have free media, if you don't have all the instruments that equip and empowers the citizens of those countries, as I said, not just to rely on their government, but to themselves have checks and balance and means of eaveswatching and making sure that nothing gets diverted, that justice is done, that power doesn't get concentrated or abused or exceeded, so on and so forth. These are the true bastions of guarantees and further elements that strengthen the hands of the people, not just because they have the right to vote, but they have the right to also investigate and follow up on it. These are, and again, I don't want to abuse my time here, but these are, in the broad sense, elements that I, for one, constantly think of. In what way can we achieve the aim of liberty, of democracy, of all the aspects of what we have? In closing, let me tell you that as a student of history, our own history, as someone who has monitored and discussed matters with people of various generations, from the previous generation, my own generation, today's generation. The path to the future in Iran has never been an easy one. Yet we have survived as a civilization, as a culture and nation throughout history. Because I think that a lot of the principles that we advocate here is not alien to Iranians. In fact, it has always been desired and advocated throughout the centuries and throughout our cultures. And we look at the modern days, it is not surprising to realize that it was Iran who first was able to introduce, as a country in our part of the world, at least the elements of a parliamentary system of democracy at the turn of the 20th century. Did we achieve full freedom? No, we didn't. Was liberty compromised at some stage? It was. Did the previous regime fail in affording people the degree of political freedoms parallel to the economic abilities that it had produced, these are the questions that we all had faced, which led to the crisis of the revolution, where people thought that perhaps through that way they would achieve those goals. And unfortunately, not only did we not achieve political freedom, we lost every other social freedom we had. So where are we now? And from now on, where can we go? Have we learned in the process the value of freedom? And beyond the value of freedom, are we willing to pay the price for freedom? When I see the Green Movement today, when I see today's young men and women who are willing to sacrifice their lives for that freedom, it shows me several things. Yes, they have understood the price to pay for freedom and are willing to pay it. 2, they appreciate and value diversity and pluralism. 3, they understand that together they have to achieve that goal, as opposed to look at it purely from a sectarian / ideological / party view. And that they're willing to fight for each other's right, not just their own personal demands. These are all positive signs that the political evolution and maturity of this nation has reached a very different level that perhaps was never achieved before. Certainly my generation never had. I look at this as a positive sign. And it would be a historical game changer to provide this generation with the full ability to succeed. Because the price otherwise will be far too heavy, not just for us Iranians, but I honestly believe for the whole world. When we are faced with the prospect of nuclearization, of proliferation, of further radicalization, when we can think of the shock that the world economy can no longer afford to have as a result of further escalation in our region, and when we ought to know and should believe that the best ingredient that could bring change to the good sense, the people of Iran themselves, who are willing and without any help so far have been committed to fight for their freedoms, it would be historically criminal not to invest on the best instrument that can bring about change, rather than contemplating military strikes on Iran or what have you. That, ladies and gentlemen, is in front of us as we speak with you right now. We don't need to create it, we don't need to invent it, we don't need to educate it. It's there, it's willing, and it's only asking, don't leave us alone, just make it easier for us and bring the cost of change down. The rest we will do. And I wanted to share that with you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Royal